All right, welcome back into Reiter's Block from Los Angeles, California, presented by Stefan versus the Game on Facebook Watch. I'm Bill Reiter, and we got a great show planned for you. Randy Couture, the longtime, former, multi-time UFC champion, going to be on the program. We're going to dive into the numbers and what has been an incredible series between the Warriors and the Rockets, and we place the accurate finger of blame on the one person who is the reason the Celtics are down 3-1 against the Bucks. It all starts right now. As good as these NBA playoffs have been in the second round, and they've been pretty extraordinary. There's one series that is basically over. Milwaukee, as I'm sure you know, took a 3-1 series lead over the Celtics last night. And as we told you on the show yesterday, teams in the NBA, when it's been a best-of-7 series, they get up 3-1, they win 95.5% of the time. And there's one person to blame. Yes, Giannis has been incredible, no doubt. Yes, the Bucks are a great basketball team. Certainly true. The only team in the top 4 in offensive and defensive rating this year, for example. And it's absolutely also, I think, correlated to the fact that Mike Budenholzer is a coach of the year who came into Milwaukee and turned it around. But there's also blame that has to go around, not just praise, and it falls squarely at the feet of Kyrie Irving. We've been singing this song for a while. We've been telling this tale on Reiter's Block the entire season, that the siren song, the seduction of Kyrie's talent, and it is massive. And the ring that he has from his time in Cleveland, and he helped earn that in a big way, distracted from the fact that he just doesn't fit in to this basketball team. Not in the locker room if you talk to sources around that Celtics organization, not on the floor if you simply watch, and not in the data if you dive into it like we have. Here's a reality. Here's a truth, and Kyrie Irving is the reason this hasn't happened. This Celtics team should be better than they were last year. A few things to consider. Last season, the Celtics, and when LeBron's in your conference, it's not an easy thing to advance, the Celtics made an Eastern Conference Finals Game 7 without Kyrie Irving. They had a Gordon Hayward, and I know Gordon Hayward's had a terrible, terrible postseason, especially this series, but they still added the guy. They brought in Kyrie, a champion, a closer. Some people think, not me, a top 10 player in the NBA. And here's a fun fact. There are 4 teams this season that are in the top 10 in both offensive and defensive rating. And if you do that historically in this century, other than a couple examples, you are going to win an NBA championship. In fact, you have to. Let me say that again. You have to be in the top 10 in both in order to win an NBA championship. Those 4 teams, Milwaukee, pretty good. Toronto, pretty good. Interestingly, Denver, pretty good. And this Celtics team, they're underperforming by every single metric. And the reason is that Kyrie Irving doesn't fit in with this team. His massive ego is a problem. He doesn't take responsibility. And he pretends like the group of guys he's playing with have never accomplished anything before, when in fact, as we mentioned, last year they almost made an NBA Finals. And just as a reminder why we've talked about this and why it's true, is this gem from January that I think speaks to this.
Best thing I can say is experience. We're lacking it, and because of that, we have a lot of learning to do. These are a lot of things that I don't think that some of my teammates have faced, of just every single day. It's not easy to be great.
I don't know if it's the ego, which you just saw there. I don't know if it's the insouciance, the fact that sometimes it feels like he just doesn't give a damn. I don't know if it's that Kyrie just doesn't know how to relate to guys. I do know this. As I make calls around the NBA, as I talk to executives and former players and people who have been through this, one truism rises above all the others. And that is that if guys don't like each other, especially their star, the wheels can come off. Not always, but most of the time. And the reality is that Kyrie can be a hard guy to like. The world is flat nonsense. The thing that we just showed you, throwing his guys under the bus. Players who were joyous last year on the Celtics team constantly saying throughout the year, it's just not fun. They're pointing the finger like we are here on Reiter's Block at Kyrie Irving. And then there's this stroke of, I'm not going to say stupidity because that's unkind, but why would you go to Jackie McMullen, who I have a ton of respect for, and say what you're looking at right there? Quote, I've been playing basketball a lot longer than some of these people analyzing the game. I'm an actual genius when it comes to this game. To quote Game of Thrones, or to misquote it, any man who has to call himself a genius is no genius at all. And I'm not the one that used the genius word. It was Kyrie, so let's use it against him a little bit here with some accuracy. A genius, probably after a Game 3 loss where he doesn't play very well, should avoid saying something like this.
It's really just about being efficient, especially the rest of the series. From this point on, I don't think you'll see another 8 for 22, or any missed layups or looking for the refs for calls or anything like that. It's just who's going to outscore the other team and who's going to be better efficient at it.
Hey, genius, you went 7 of 22 in Game 4. It's actually a less efficient version of that night. Here's why Kyrie Irving is a problem. And I recognize, like everybody who's been around this game, who's covered it, who's played it, who's watched it, who's a fan of it, like you are, that he's a massive talent. There's no doubt. He outdueled Steph Curry in that NBA Finals. He can hit big shots. And we've said this all year on the show. He can win you a game or two in a series you otherwise wouldn't win because he's on the floor. He can also lose you a series that you shouldn't and take you out of a series that you could be in. The Bucks were down 1-0 in this series, and I'll brag a little more on the program here on Writer's Block. I told you, we told you, don't worry, Milwaukee's fine. Once the Celtics get punched in the nose, once the Bucks get their sea legs a little bit, we'll see who Kyrie is and who this team is. And the reality is they're not a team that gets along with their star player. He has divided that locker room, and they just don't play at the same level they need to. And Kyrie, the genius, has his own solution that he threw out there yesterday. And the first part of this is the most important. We're going to tear it apart with this thing called facts. Kyrie has his own solution to what Boston and he need to do going forward.
For me, the 22 shots, I should have shot 30. It's a little different when, your rhythm is challenged every play down. You're being picked up full court. They're doing things to test you. And, the expectations on me are going to be sky high.
Let's ignore the parts about how hard it is when guys play defense on you and the intensity of the postseason. Something you would think Kyrie Irving, with all his experience, wouldn't be surprised by. And focus on the first part of what he said, that he should have taken 30 shots. In fact, no, my friend, my genius friend, you should not have. And here are the reasons why. We got into the numbers. I think this is utterly fascinating. This is a team this year, a Celtics team, in the regular season that was 49-33. That's good for a .598 winning percentage. Without Kyrie this year, small sample size, they were 12-3. That is winning 80% of your games. But let's go to the Kyrie should take more shots. When Kyrie Irving takes 10 or fewer shots this year, didn't happen very often. 6 games, 4-2. You basically win 2/3 of your games, 667. When he takes 15 or fewer shots, bigger sample size, 21 games. That's big enough, NBA people will tell you, to have a sense of a trend or something. They are 15-6. That's a 71.5% win clip. How about when Kyrie Irving takes 20 or more shots? Like he did last night. Like he does most nights. They're a below 500 team if you include the postseason. 13-17. No, Kyrie, you shouldn't take 30 shots. You should make sure that the game is played in a way that benefits the Celtics and not your ego. Those are the numbers, and they're real. Here's another interesting comparison. And I'm not saying that Isaiah Thomas on this basketball team would make them better. That's not true. That's not a fact. But Isaiah Thomas was the linchpin, unfortunately, for the Cavs of that trade for Kyrie Irving. Let's look at the comparison between Isaiah Thomas and Kyrie in the postseason. Kyrie this year, Isaiah Thomas 2017. more points per game, better true shooting percentage, better player efficiency rating. The reality is that Kyrie is not the guy that he thinks he is. He's not the genius that he believes that he is. And one last fact, just to prove this is Kyrie's fault, and it's certainly his fault in the locker room. You can't say things like that, treat your guys like they haven't done anything, and then not show up. And he hasn't shown up on the floor. Everything's forgiven if you're a winner. In this series, Kyrie is averaging fewer than 22 points per game. He's shooting 37% from the field and 24% from three-point land. And he's taken more than 6 threes per game. And if you take away that Game 1 win for Boston, as the wheels have started to come off, it's worse. He's averaging 20 points per game over the last 3, shooting just under 31% from the field, and only making 20% of his threes. Kyrie Irving is the problem. We told you that here on the show for the last few months and the last few weeks. This is a Celtics team that is worse off with that star, genius or otherwise. So Celtics fans, if you're watching and you're worried or you're thinking that Kyrie might exit stage right at the end of this series because it'll be the end of this season and go to a place like the Knicks, I'm telling you, the facts are telling you, good riddance. A lot of stars in this postseason. It's been fun to watch. Jokic, Lillard, Harden, KD, Giannis, Kawhi, at times Embiid. Kyrie Irving's not one of them, at least not in the sense of making his team better, and that's a fact. We're going to talk a little UFC. I'm excited. A little MMA. Randy Couture is going to be on the program, former UFC multi-time champion, and then we'll get into what's been a really interesting statistical matchup between the Warriors and the Rockets. But Randy Couture coming up first here on Writer's Block with me, Bill Reiter, presented by Writer's Block, presented by Stefan versus the Game on Facebook Watch. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back into Writer's Block, brought to you by Stefan versus the Game on Facebook Watch. Had the chance earlier to visit with UFC MMA legend Randy Couture. Really good dude. Here's our conversation from earlier. Randy, thanks. I'm a huge fan. This is super cool. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having me on.
So as I just said, you're one of the legends of the sport. You're a multi-time champion. You're one of the guys that really defined the rise of MMA, UFC, and beyond. When you look out at the sport as a fan, as an expert, how do you feel about the way that it's evolved, the way that it's grown since you got started?
Well, certainly as a fighter and watching the fighters, I think it's come a long way. It's evolved a lot. And tactically and technically, the level of athlete and the level of fighting that's going on now is a lot different than when I started back in '97. That being said, I think there's also been some growing pains in the sport. Now that it's become the combative sport for this generation. It's on almost every single weekend. You can tune in somewhere and find MMA. I think we as fighters need to get a little more organized, recognize that we are the product here, and that without us there are no shows, and maybe get a fairer shot at what's going on, the revenue and all the things that are happening in the sport right now. Take care of ourselves with 501c3s or not 501c3s, but 401ks. So with their retirement, health benefits, some of those things that a lot of the other professional athletes in our society enjoy, we're not getting any of that right now. So, and that I think is on us as fighters.
Yeah, there's no argument that the sport doesn't make a lot of money. Look no further than UFC's sale a few years ago. It's a B as in billions, not an M as in millions in terms of what, and obviously it's a dominant company, but that's just one MMA company. How do fighters do that, Randy? Because obviously, whether it's Dana White or the next guy, when people have a stranglehold on the finances of something that works, they're not usually going to turn into charity and say, here, why don't you take a big chunk of this? How do fighters actually get that done?
Well, I'm part of the Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association, and educating fighters about the need for the Fighters Association, getting us all to come together, especially those guys that are active now. It's one thing for me as a retired athlete to be involved, but all the active fighters, the top guys right now, are the guys that really have the most influence. If we can get them involved and see the wisdom in forming the Fighters Association, creating an entity not unlike SAG, the Screen Actors Guild. I mean, if you look at all the different studios that are all promoting and making films, all drawing from a pool of talent, that's the most similar thing to what we're doing in fighting. We have a bunch of promotions that are all wanting to put on fights. There's a pool of athletes that they're pulling from. If we come together and get organized, then we can at least develop some minimum criteria, some minimum pay standards, get some retirement and health care in place. And a lot of those things that, like the NFLPA, the Players Association, Major League Baseball, basketball, they all have players associations. And that's what the Fighters Association is all about.
I mean, I get you. In my radio world, I'm a part of SAG-AFTRA, and obviously UFC is the dominant force, but not the only force. And the more we see MMA leagues, associations, enterprises that work, maybe the easier this is going to be. In terms of the Professional Fighters League, and it's interesting because it's a different format. It's really structured around what we've come to know as a regular season, right? A regular season, a playoffs, a championship. Can you tell us about that and where you hope and where you think that's going?
Well, I think that's the one thing that distinguishes the PFL from every other organization out there that's putting on MMA fights. This format, having a regular season, 6 weight classes, 12 athletes in each weight class, all going out and doing their best to score, to make enough points and finish those fights in distinct fashion so that they get the nod and are in the top 8 to move to the playoffs. In the playoffs, they're going to fight the quarterfinals and the semifinals in the same night. That's a tall order. That's what we used to do in the early days. It was a tournament back then. So just like the NHL going on right now for the Stanley Cup, it's about progressing. Guys can talk all they want, but they still have to go out there and win fights and do it in a dynamic fashion if they're going to get a shot at that $1 million in the finals.
Randy, we know heavyweights can fight generally longer than guys that are in the sport that are a little bit smaller. But 40s is 40s. If memory serves, you won the heavyweight championship at age 43. Anderson Silva is still fighting at age 44. Can you just give us a sense at that age, at that weight class, the advantages and the struggles to try to be competitive?
Well, I think the science of athletics has come a long ways. You know, you're seeing that across the board in a lot of different sports, not just fighting. I was certainly fortunate not to sustain any serious injuries that hampered me from keeping my fitness level high and competing at a high level well into my 40s. I fought till I was 47. You know, I think you're seeing guys in other sports do the same thing. We're getting smarter about what we put in our bodies, how we take care of these machines that we're trying to run and compete at that high level. So that's what that's all about. Anderson's certainly doing a good job of that and taking care of himself. But, you know, I feel fortunate to have been able to do what I did.
You know, whether it's Michael Jordan or Willie Mays back in the day or Chuck Liddell, it's hard for guys that compete their whole lives and don't listen to the doubters to move on when the time is right. Do you miss fighting, or when it was finally over for you, was that transition easy?
I feel very fortunate that I had acting and the other business entities that I developed in my time as a fighter to fall back on, to focus on as my new purpose, you know, getting acting jobs. I think that lack of purpose, you know, being whether it's a soldier, a fighter, or an athlete, a football player, that's your sole purpose and identity. It's very wrapped up in that endeavor. It's hard to just walk away from that. It's a very personal thing. So having something else to focus on, a new purpose that will occupy your time, your competitive juices, whatever it is, that's very important. And I feel fortunate that I had those things as I transitioned both as a pro athlete and then, you know, as a wrestler as well.
At UFC 237, Rose Namajunas is going to her second title defense, and she'll be headlining that card. How important do you think women's MMA is to UFC's future, just to the future of the sport broadly?
Well, my perspective there is it comes from wrestling, and women were striving for a long time to be a full medal Olympic sport. Now there's a huge collegiate movement in women's athletics for wrestling. I think having a female counterpart to our sport is very, very important. You look at the application of Title IX over the years since the 80s, since it was founded, it's decimated collegiate sports in the men's world. Men's swimming is all about gone. Men's gymnastics, certainly men's wrestling has taken a shot. Programs are dropped all over to be in compliance with Title IX. So having wrestling programs in the women's world and in the men's world helps take that pressure off. And I think that same thing translates to mixed martial arts. Obviously, women's boxing has been around quite a while, and there's a lot of great boxers. You look what Holly Holm did as a world-class boxer stepping into MMA. So I think having that female counterpart is something we need to embrace, and it's something that's really, really good for us as a male sport.
Yeah, it's really interesting. At UFC 239, Santos is going to fight John Jones in that light heavyweight division. Is anyone a real challenger at this stage to John Jones?
Well, I think John's a tall order for anybody right now. Talent-wise, there's nobody better. Obviously, he's had some other issues, kind of keeping things straight outside of the cage. But when he walks up in that cage, there's nobody more talented than he is right now.
Do you think we'll eventually get a Cormier-John Jones trilogy fight? Do you expect to see those two guys in an octagon or again? So much history.
I don't know. The real question is, will Jones go up to heavyweight for that, or will Cormier come back down to light heavyweight? I think Daniel's pretty happy being a heavyweight, frankly. So the real question is whether Jones wants to come up there and play around with the big guys.
Yeah, I mean, when hey, you know what? DC's probably earned the right to be patient, to say the least. I know this is a year old, but my family, we all just went to the Avengers movie, so Chris Pratt's on the brain, and we the old Instagram of you guys, and you guys have some history back in the day. So okay, so actors, and you're an actor and an MMA guy, and a legend as an MMA guy. Sometimes actors act like they're tough because they're actors, but the word is, Jake Laser says that Pratt punches harder than you, which I find hard to believe. Is Pratt legit?
Laser,
I mean, really?
well, Laser's going to find any way to poke at me and have fun with me. So Pratt is the first guy to tell you he's not a tough guy, but he's also a very, very good wrestler. All his wrestling skills and that wrestler's mindset is what made him who he is. He embraces that as part of the foundation of who he is, and he's still a very good wrestler. I enjoy working out with him. It's fun to have another wrestler to pummel with and to work with and drill with, and Chris is all that. He's very, very good, very talented athlete.
Yeah, that brings me to my last question. I was struck by it. He talked about the fact that base taught him to be a grinder and what he chose to do for a living. For those of us, and I once tried in Davenport, Iowa, at Pat Milicich's gym. I once tried to do MMA for real, and then I thought, I'm just going to talk about this and write about this for a living. But it is like boxing, wrestling, MMA, even casually, it's a really interesting way just to get in shape. For the non-professional athlete, are there some life lessons that you can pull from this sport?
Absolutely. I think anytime you mentioned Chris mentioning embracing the grind, this style, this individual combative sport, whether it's wrestling, Muay Thai, kickboxing, any form of grappling, there's a grind to that. It's physically demanding. It's mentally demanding. You're literally playing kinetic chess. And so I think there are life lessons. You're going to lose. You're going to get beat up on occasion. You got to pick yourself back up, dust yourself off, and get back to doing what you do best and figuring out how to do it better. And that's life. So I think that's why that sport's important.
Randy, enjoyed the conversation. Congrats on all your post-fighting success, the Professional Fighters League included. Really appreciate your time. We'd love to do it again sometime.
I appreciate you having us on.
All right, really appreciate Randy's time. And moving on to the NBA, Rockets Warriors. Everything about this series has been really interesting, including the data. We'll go inside that when we come back to the program in just a moment here on CBS Sports HQ. All right, welcome into Writer's Block, presented by Stefan versus the Game on Facebook Watch. You see it there. Great series, interesting numbers. We're going to go inside those numbers right now on Warriors versus the Rockets. We start with 29 plus, because Kevin Durant has had 29 or more points in 8 straight playoff games. Only 2 other players in the past 40 years have done the same, LeBron James and Michael Jordan. How about the number 1? In the series so far, the Warriors have barely outscored the Rockets, 448 to 447 combined over those 4 games. Next up is the number 30. Steph Curry had his 4th straight game shooting at or below 30% from deep, going just 4 of 14 from 3 in Game 4. Not ideal. Next up is the number 50. The Rockets had 57 rebounds in Game 4, the 2nd straight game with 50 or more rebounds. Since Steve Kerr took over, the Warriors are 8-9 in the postseason when an opponent grabs 50 or more boards. And finally, 29-30. Home teams this postseason are 29-30 against the spread. Home teams in this series have bucked that trend, going 3-1. All right, did he do it? I had Giannis as my winner of Trial by Stat. You, in the poll that we put out there on Twitter, had Giannis, at least in the first matchup. Let's get into it. Kyrie versus the Greek Freak, not even close. Giannis dominates, and as we discussed at the top of the show, Kyrie shrunk again in the moment. So, all right, Greek Freak moves on. How about KD versus Harden? Hell of a showdown, hell of a matchup. But to the winner goes the spoils. Harden was incredible, so he moves on to face Giannis. You see it there. It's so close. It's minuscule. the distance between them. But Giannis is the man, the winner of the trial by stat. The throne, the NBA Iron Throne, is his this week. Congratulations, Giannis Antetokounmpo. He did great. I was mediocre. 1-1 yesterday, so Bill's big bet of the day. Yeah, it's okay. I'm treading water, a little 14-12. Hate Sixers at Raptors, hate the line. Don't know which Joel Embiid's going to show up, if Embiid's going to show up. So give me the Blazers plus the 4.5. I think they get the win. I think they shock Denver. I'm still going with Dame having a huge game. Thank you for hanging out here on Writer's Block. Appreciate you. They're taking over in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. CBS Sports HQ, your home for streaming sports, continues right now.